I'm delighted to introduce our special guest of the month, David Raab, who as a 17-year-old was hijacked by the PFLP and held captive and lived to tell the tale in a riveting new book entitled Terror in Black September. Hello, David.
Hi, Renee.
What happened?
It all started, I was on the plane with my mother and 4 siblings on TWA plane headed back from Israel to the United States. We had stopped in Frankfurt for refueling and for taking on passengers. And a few minutes out of Frankfurt, suddenly we hear a scream from the back, and a man and a woman ran forward. She was carrying a hand grenade. He was carrying a pistol. I still see the pistol glinting in the sun at this minute. And before we knew it, the plane was turning around in a slow arc, heading south. And we knew we were hijacked. Shortly afterwards, a woman terrorist got on the PA system and announced that this was the doing of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. We were about to land in a friendly country called Jordan. And that was terrifying to us, because here we were being hijacked by a terrorist group that had killed many Israelis and we knew was capable of killing Israelis and Jews. And we were now about to land in a country that was at war with Israel. Jordan was at war with Israel. This was 3 years after the Six-Day War. As soon as we landed, we were surrounded by terrorists again with machine guns. We thought we might be shot up right then and there. This was a very compelling human drama. Several hundred innocent civilians sitting on 3 airplanes on the desert floor with no electricity on the planes, so therefore no cooling during the day in the middle of the desert, no light at night, no heating at night, no functioning toilets, and all the time surrounded by terrorists who we thought were capable of either shooting us up or blowing us up at any moment in time. Thursday night, Friday morning was actually 2 a.m. September 11th. It seems to be an auspicious day in terrorism history. I was sleeping soundly for the first time. I had spread out on a few seats, and then at 2 a.m. there was suddenly a flashlight shining in my face. The co-pilot tapped me on my shoulder and told me, "David, they want you up front for questioning." There was a gorilla standing behind him, and I asked if I should put on my shirt and my shoes because I had gotten myself comfortable. And they said yes. So I knew that I was about to be taken off the plane. And as I started walking up the aisle, I started shaking. I lost control of my movement and of my body. But I kept walking forward. My mother, who had been sitting a few rows back, heard the commotion, and she immediately sensed something was going on. She ran up, she asked what was going on, and then she tried to convince the Palestinians not to take me off the plane, that I was a mere 17-year-old child, and what did I know about what was going on here. But they would not listen to her, and at one point they actually even waved a gun at her, threatening her and telling her to go sit down. They asked me to sign a form, which I couldn't sign because my hand was shaking so much. And then finally, I left the plane. There was a wooden ladder that was leaned against the door, and the ladder went down to the desert floor. And it was middle of the night, no lights around, and I felt that I was being taken away to be killed. After I was taken off the plane, and my mother went to the back door of the plane. Obviously, she was very emotional. She said the Shema. It was very meaningful to her at the time, and always since. But she couldn't see me. She stayed on the plane with my 3 brothers and sister for another day and a half, at which point the terrorists took all the remaining women and children, released them, blew up the 3 planes, and my mother had to make a decision then about whether to leave me in Jordan by myself or whether she should stay and try and get me out. And the next day, when they were finally taken to the buses to leave Jordan, to go to the airport to leave Jordan, she had to take tranquilizers because it was so difficult for her to leave. She had to be helped onto the bus because she was leaving her oldest son in Jordan. And as it turned out, they took me and 9 other men away, put us in a little minivan, and drove us off to a refugee camp near Amman, where we would spend the next few days. After those 10 days, Palestinians decided that we had become a liability rather than an asset, and they released us unconditionally. The short-term effects of the hijacking when I got back to the United States were what I guess can be expected. In those days, they didn't know about post-traumatic stress, so I was basically put right back into the routine of life, and I was back in college registering and trying to resume a normal life. At first, I had nightmares for a few weeks, on and off. I was also very frightened of lights that would go on and off would frighten me. Flashing lights would frighten me quite a bit. And I think that was because when we first landed in Jordan and it was dark outside, there were armored cars around, and they were flashing their lights on and off, and I thought that was a signal to someone to blow us up. And so when I got back, when I saw those flashing lights, I continued to be quite terrified. Over time, those things kind of went away. It took me a while to be comfortable flying again. The first half hour of any flight was very traumatic for me. I think the longer-term effects of this whole experience were that I became very obsessed with Israel. I felt that my personal life was now part of Israel's history, that I had somehow become one with Israel's history.
There were many ways you could have told this story. Why now?
I decided to write the book now because this was a major historical event that had never been documented. And I decided to do it in an interesting way. I did a tremendous amount of research for this book. I went to the archives in Washington, in London, and in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, and I went back to Jordan to interview people who were involved in the hijacking. But what I also did and felt was important was to tell the human side of the story, things that hadn't been told before. And the way I did this was by interweaving my personal diary that I had written as a 17-year-old back in 1970 and interwove it in the text of the history of the historical part. And it's denoted here in the book in italics and set off from the rest of the text, so you can see what was my personal story written when I was 17 years old versus my voice as a historian now at 50-something.
David, I really want to thank you for sharing some of these horrendous experiences that you had to endure.
Well, thank you very much for having me on today and for being interested in my story. I think we've touched on just some of the highlights of the story. There's a whole slew of other very moving, very compelling stories in here that I hope the viewers will find interesting enough to read. And I really, again, do thank you for taking an interest in my story.